Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds, nerdettes, and gamers of all ages, everybody's working for the weekend, and guess what? So is yours truly. Blazing Ace Nelson back again, and here I thought I was just going to be doing a, post-E3 autopsy sort of commentary video, but events over the past few days, events over the past day and a half, and also certain things from E3, which I'll be getting to, or at least from over that weekend, have awoken the beast. So, it's time for some more choice words. Strap yourselves in. Put me on the clock. Let's go.
Hey, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Hey, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Hey, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Hey, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Now, first off, I want to start with Capcom. That's right. I'm starting with Capcom. Now, practically coinciding with E3, Capcom had decided to release some brand new multiplayer DLC for their Xbox One exclusive Dead Rising 3. Now, the gaming media, from what I've seen, as far as articles concerning this DLC, says that the title of said Dead Rising DLC is poking fun at Capcom. Considering their recent history, considering their track record, I'd say it's more like Capcom, in particular Capcom Vancouver, taking pot shots at the fan base and basically rubbing in their faces that, we have this beloved staple of characters. We have this gigantic library of franchises that if they saw the light of day, the fans would be happy. We've got this whole library. And we're just going to sit on it and maybe feed you Easter eggs every now and again. No, I'm beyond anger. I'm beyond being offended at this point. And now I'm just... Probably the worst thing you could hear as an author, as a storyteller of any stripe, especially as a game developer, are the words, "I don't care what happens to this character or this company." But aside from what I'm about to mention, I've really gotten to the point where I just don't give two flying shits about Capcom anymore. I mean, I'm still going to play Sengoku Basara 4, and I'll probably still be doing the character walkthroughs. 2 request videos should be coming up within the next week or so. But this is why I really wanted to get down to talking about Capcom, and it's because just recently, and links to everything that I'll be discussing today, as always, are going to be down in the description bar below. But an article from back on June 16th, so that would be about 3 days ago now. Today, Capcom announced that at its most recent investor meeting, its shareholders voted to end the company's hostile takeover defense, aka Capcom is basically on the market now. So if you have the cash on hand to buy any shares in the company, then by all means go for it. I think after converting it from yen to US dollars, I forget which video I heard it on. I think no, it was in the comment section of Alpha Omega Sin's video discussing this, Its shares at Capcom currently run, I believe, around $17.50 a share. So if you've got the pockets to buy up a majority of the 161,000 shares in Capcom stock, then you could effectively start a hostile takeover of Capcom, which I think they need. Someone needs to buy out Capcom. Some vendor needs to walk up to, I don't know, Platinum Games or Comcept. You know, maybe Nintendo. Someone needs to walk up to them, do like the vendor in Resident Evil 4. What are you buying? And their response should be, I'm buying Capcom. Gimme. Because at this point, that's practically what all Capcom's really good for at this juncture. I mean, between the high turnover rate of community managers left and right, Yoshinori Ono leaving Capcom Vancouver to go back to focusing on his work at Capcom Japan, and then just the constant BS coming from Capcom anyway. Your time's up. You're done. Someone needs to get in there and buy out Capcom and turn that place around, and do so quickly. If any of Capcom's franchises, let alone Capcom as a company, is to really survive or thrive, then Capcom cannot exist as it does today. Sometimes to build a new world, it means tearing the old one down. So, yeah, Capcom, you're a shell of your former self. As you exist now, you need to go. Simple as that. Now, on the topic of game developers that really need to get their shit together, which I think is actually going to be the theme of today's choice words anyway, I want to take a look at Square Enix. Now, Square Enix, how can I put this? When you actually refer to them by their original name, when you refer to them, or when you think back to their days as Squaresoft, even before they tried to buy out Electronic Arts temporarily and become Square EA, when you think of them as Squaresoft, when you think of them as Square, most of us gamers tend to think back on better times, tend to think back on their earlier titles, like the first 9 or 10 entries in the Final Fantasy franchise, like Chrono Trigger, Vagrant Story, like when they teamed up with Nintendo for Super Mario RPG. You know, we're talking not just pushing the limits of the hardware that they were using, but also pushing the quality of their content and of their storytelling. Now, personally, I'm a big old school Square Enix fan. I'm a big old school Square fan. I still have copies of, I mean, in between the PS1 re-releases and, you know, various other physical copies of the games, I own the first 10, actually, Final Fantasy games. The first 10 core games in the series, and I love them to death. To this date, I'll still throw in FF6. But lately, Square Enix has really, really been taking a dive. Now, as I'm sure you all know, Square Enix has been doing a lot more as far as their game design goes. They've been doing a lot more to try and appeal to the Western markets, to try and appeal to Western gamers. But what they're doing is looking at trends, like how so many Call of Duty and first-person shooter style games have been selling so well over here in the States. They've been looking at how studios like Ubisoft or Activision have actually been, pushing a certain type of game, a certain type of genre. And Square Enix, with their main flagship titles, mind you, like Final Fantasy, have been trying to tap into those genres in order to try and tap into that wellspring of income. They got a small taste of success with Final Fantasy XI. The first Final Fantasy MMO, which personally I think should have just been called Final Fantasy Online, that was big. I mean, that was one of the killer apps during the latter portion of the PS2's life cycle. With Final Fantasy XII, Square Enix tried to keep that same MMO feel, but shoehorn it into a console RPG. The execution was honestly less than stellar. I mean, the closest to a console RPG that plays like an MMO that really works, in my opinion, the best example of that, the example, will forever be the Dot Hack series. That's a console MMORPG done right. Final Fantasy XII was not only plagued with a changing of the creative staff midway through development, thus destroying the pacing of the story. But while it's easy to see what they were trying to go for with a lot of the MMO mechanics, it floundered. It floundered, especially in the face of their previous console successes, like Final Fantasy X, like Final Fantasy VII. Big commercial successes that were timely releases as far as heralding a new generation of gaming and heralding new ideas in storytelling. With Final Fantasy XIII, train wreck. Train wreck. And the fact that that metaphorical train wreck damn near starts with a literal train wreck at the start of the game, that should have been our first clue. I mean, I'll admit it, I was all aboard the hype coaster when Final Fantasy XIII was announced. I wanted to see this game do well. I wanted this game to be good. But FF13 and the subsequent games in that new compilation that they tried to establish and force down our throats, it showed itself as a prime example of trying to fix what ain't broken, westernizing when they don't need it. Square Enix, if any of your big decision makers are watching this, listen closely to these next few seconds. You don't need to rebrand. You already have established your own unique brand. You don't need Call of Duty. You don't need to make Call of Duty numbers. Hell, you don't even need to make Final Fantasy VII numbers. You just need to do you. Go back to the drawing board. See what has worked from the previous games and build on that. Speaking of the previous games, let's get into the remakes really quick. Now, like I said, between various ports and remakes, I do own 1 through 10 as far as Final Fantasy goes. But with so many remakes of 1, so many remakes and re-releases of 6, a complete top-to-bottom retooling and remaking of Final Fantasy III. The one game in the series that the entirety of their user base has been clamoring for is Final Fantasy VII. All I need to do is just say, there's a possibility of a Final Fantasy VII remake, and half the user base would be saying it's about time. The other half of the user base would be too busy celebrating. I've said this time and again, Square Enix, if you actually jump on this opportunity, you can damn near print your own money. But instead, just recently we get an announcement for, on mobile devices, Final Fantasy VII J-Bike. So you want to take the motorcycle minigame from Final Fantasy VII, release that as its own separate title with, of course, you know, the graphical fine-tuning, the localization fine-tuning, and the bells and whistles that you put into all your other more recent efforts. You want to do that, and then say, if Final Fantasy VII G-Bike does well, then that could leave open the possibility for more Final Fantasy VII related pieces. You are, once again, holding what the fans want hostage, contingent upon the success of something nobody, absolutely, damn near nobody asked for. You throw a useless throwaway title like G-Bike at us and say, oh, if you eat this up, you know, if this makes numbers comparable to the original Final Fantasy VII, then we might just toss a few more crumbs your way, or we might just decide to go ahead and make the remake. Between Advent Children, Crisis Core, and Dirge of Cerberus, as far as actual assets go, Square Enix, you have no excuse. Between fans buying various games of yours for the nostalgia factor or for the brand recognition, you've got the income coming in. You had enough income to buy Eidos Montreal. Financial resources, informational resources, metric fuck tons of talent. You have no excuse. There is demand out there for a true retooling, relocalizing, remaking from top to bottom of Final Fantasy VII. There is demand, and there is literally only one person among you at Square Enix that is holding this back. And that is the same... And that's the same person who, for some odd reason, can't find the will within himself to try and work on something like this. Take a look at your fan base. That should be your wake-up call. If nothing else, your fans should be where you pull that motivation, where you pull that will from, because it is your fans that are the reason why you can celebrate the success that you have. I don't know if I'm going to be picking up Final Fantasy 15 when it releases. I want it to be good. But from what I've seen, you're trying to blend East and West as far as design sensibilities and as far as gameplay. And that blending just, it's really not necessary. Think about it. But while you're thinking about it, pull your heads out of your asses. Come see the daylight. You already caught a glimpse of it with the commercial success of Bravely Default. You now know that Western gamers actually like JRPGs. You've got the opportunity. Don't waste it. And now for something that's a little bit more recent. And when I say a little bit more recent, I'm talking yesterday, June 18th. Now, for those of you watching, for those of you out in YouTube land, when you hear the name Phil Fish, what comes to mind? Is it the struggles that he went through as chronicled in Indie Game, the movie? Is it the game that he was struggling with and finally brought to market for a rather decent amount of success, Fez? Or is it the monumentally galling self-importance, the outright douche kebabbery with which Phil Fish has conducted himself? If you chose answer C, well, then that means you and I are in the same boat, because honestly, that's where I am in regards to Phil Fish at this point. Now, you see, this guy has the nerve, the absolute nerve, to basically go out and try to say that YouTubers are committing piracy by posting gameplay videos. Now, as you can probably imagine, this hits pretty close to home with me. You know, I'm a YouTube gamer. I like putting up gameplay footage, I like sharing my experiences with gaming with those of you that are subscribed, and even those of you that aren't. Anyone who watches my videos. I'm sharing my experience with the game with you because I want to. There are some that do it, like Toby Turner, like PewDiePie, like Maximilian. There are some that do it and make truckloads of money off of it. Recently, there have been setups put in place so that that money that they make is made via ad revenue, which goes to YouTube, and with portions of it going to YouTube and to the various people that are advertising on these YouTube videos. When it was revealed that PewDiePie is currently raking in $4 million annually in ad sales, Fish decides that he wants to weigh in, saying that he's entitled to some of the money earned by by YouTubers featuring footage of his game on their channels. But what he doesn't seem to realize is that there already was a system in place where he could do just that. And even without the content matching, even without the paid advertisements, even without the partnerships, the fact of the matter is, YouTubers that go online and post gameplay footage of games that they are playing and by and large enjoying or reviewing, this is free advertising for you. This is free advertising, and this is evidence of the kind of fan base that you have. The kind of user base that you are attracting with your games. If people like PewDiePie, like Slow Beef and the dudes at Let's Play, if people like Event Status, if people like myself didn't give a shit about your games, we would not be posting videos of your games. Do you see how this works? But of course, Phil Fish actually decided to take to Twitter and start, spouting off the mouth at this. Now, as of this point, the coward's deleted his Twitter account. But here's a couple of his tweets. If you generate money from putting my content on your channel, you owe me money. Simple as that. We already paid. It's like those of us that are putting your content on our channel, we have already paid you by purchasing your content in the first place. Ad revenue should be shared with developers. This should be built into YouTube. Anything else is basically piracy. So YouTube Let's Players are now committing piracy. So you're saying that if someone who actually goes out, buys Fez, plays it, enjoys it, decides, hey, I want to spread the word about this game. I just barely discovered it myself, but I want to show other people that I can actually have fun with this game. If someone like that decides they want to put that video up, you want them to either pay you or face jail time for pirating your work. Recording gameplay videos does not mean we are putting ROMs or ISOs on the net for people to freely download. Recording a gameplay video and putting commentary over it, or reviewing it, does not mean that we are actively trying to take money away from you for whatever amount of effort you may have put into a game. But with statements like this, you have basically become the proverbial baboon showing your ass to the entire world. And guess what? That's an ass ripe for kicking, buddy. So YouTube Let's Players are pirates now, huh? Wrong. Dead fucking wrong. You couldn't handle the criticism you were getting for your game. You couldn't handle the criticism of the shit that you've been saying in public. So you decided to just up and rage quit in the middle of developing a sequel to your relatively successful indie game. You rage quit the industry because you couldn't handle any criticism. You took the money and ran, as you put it. You left the team that you were working with to try and develop this game high and dry. And there are people out there defending you. There are people out there trying to damage control your stupid ass. This dark side Phil Fish motherfucker wants to try and claim that we as gamers, who just so happen to have capture cards and YouTube accounts, owe you any extra money than what we have already paid for the games that we are playing and enjoying and basically advertising for you. Alpha Omega Sid said it best when he ranted about you the other day, so I'm gonna repeat. Phil Fish, you can fuck off. I've got nothing more to say again. Just throw Phil Fish with Don Matrick and Adam Worth and then there's this asshole file. And call it a day. Cut the check. Time. I'm done. This is your man Blazing Ace Nelson. And these have been some more choice words for you. Until next time, work hard, game harder.